What if the future of the Middle East is being shaped right now in a quiet room in Switzerland, far away from the missiles, the cameras, and the speeches? And what if the people in that room are not trying to end every conflict at all, but to design a new balance of power that could change the region for a generation? If you like videos that cut through noise and show you the real game behind the headlines, tap like, subscribe, and share this with one person who loves big ideas. For years, most people have been trained to watch the Middle East like a fire alarm. A strike happens, a militia responds, oil jumps, leaders give statements, news channels flash red graphics. Then everyone waits for the next explosion. But the truth is, history is not only written in explosions. Sometimes it is written in pauses, in private messages, in indirect meetings, in careful words chosen by people who know that one wrong sentence can shake markets, move armies, or close shipping lanes. That is why these Switzerland talks matter. Not because Switzerland is magical, not because one meeting can erase decades of rage, grief, mistrust, and rivalry, and not because diplomacy suddenly turns enemies into friends. The talks matter because serious rivals usually speak in private only when the cost of not speaking has become too high. And that is exactly where the Middle East is today. Look at the pressure building across the region. Gaza has shattered old assumptions. Lebanon has remained a constant danger zone. Iran and Israel have moved from shadow conflict to something much closer to open confrontation. The Red Sea has shown how non-state actors can disrupt global trade. The Strait of Hormuz remains one of the most dangerous choke points on Earth, with around a fifth of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas usually moving through it. When traffic there is threatened, the shock does not stay in the Gulf. It travels to Europe, Asia, shipping firms, insurance markets, factories, airlines, and family budgets around the world. So when reports emerge about quiet talks in Switzerland involving U.S. and Iranian channels, mediators, and wider regional calculations, the first mistake is to ask, so, is peace coming? That is the wrong first question. The better question is this: what changed so much that talking now seems safer than drifting? Because drifting has become expensive. And once drift becomes expensive, diplomacy stops being idealistic. It becomes practical, even urgent. To understand why this moment feels so important, we have to begin with something simple. Negotiations are often misunderstood. Most viewers hear the word talks and imagine a movie ending. A document gets signed, people shake hands, cameras flash, music rises. But real diplomacy usually does not work like that. Real diplomacy is often less about solving every problem and more about controlling how dangerous the problems become. That may sound disappointing, but it is actually how the world works. Imagine a house with old electrical wiring. You may not be able to rebuild the whole house in one day, but if the sparks are getting worse, you still need to stop the fire. That is how many states approach diplomacy in the Middle East. They are not entering the room because they suddenly trust each other. They are entering because the sparks are getting too close to the walls. And here is the part many people miss. The talks in Switzerland are not important only because of what may be said inside the room. They are important because of what the room itself represents. Switzerland has a long record of hosting sensitive diplomacy, and it has served for decades as the protecting power for U.S. interests in Iran after Washington and Tehran cut formal diplomatic ties. That matters. In crises, countries need places that feel less theatrical, less exposed, less humiliating. A neutral setting gives everyone just enough political space to explore ideas they may not be ready to defend in public. That is why secret or semi-secret diplomacy has shaped some of the biggest turning points in modern history. The public usually sees the agreement only at the end. The real shift starts earlier, in the quiet phase, when leaders test whether the old strategy is still worth its cost. And right now, the old strategy is under pressure from every direction. The military pressure is obvious. Missiles, drones, proxy networks, targeted strikes, cyber operations, air defense, retaliation ladders. The economic pressure is just as serious. Investors hate uncertainty. Shipping companies hate choke points. Energy traders hate panic. Governments can survive tension for a while. They cannot build prosperity on endless unpredictability. So the talks are not happening because leaders became sentimental. They are happening because strategy is colliding with reality. Now here is where the story becomes far more interesting. The people entering these talks may be sitting near the same table, but they are not chasing the same prize. The United States wants to reduce the chance of a wider war that could drag it deeper into the region, hit global energy markets, and damage its broader position in a world where Washington is also thinking about China, technology competition, and stretched military resources. America does not want every Middle East crisis turning into a global strategic tax. Iran wants relief from pressure, room to breathe, and recognition that it cannot simply be bombed, sanctioned, isolated, and still be expected to surrender its leverage. Tehran wants security, status, and a framework that does not leave it permanently vulnerable. It may also want time, because time in geopolitics is sometimes more valuable than territory. Israel looks at the same landscape through a different lens. For Israel, the core issue is not elegant diplomatic language, it is threat reduction. It is preventing a future in which hostile networks, missiles, and strategic encirclement become normalized. Any regional architecture that emerges will be judged in Israel by one brutal question: does this make the next war less likely or only postpone it? The Gulf states have another set of concerns. They want stability, yes, but not a naive stability. They want to keep building, trading, investing, and diversifying without waking up to a missile exchange that sends oil prices soaring and scares capital away. At the same time, they do not want a settlement that simply hands Iran more room without changing behavior. Their ideal outcome is usually some version of managed competition: less chaos, clearer rules, fewer shocks. Other regional players also have their own calculations, from border security to mediation prestige to economic opportunity. No one enters a moment like this empty-handed. That is why these talks are so hard to read from the outside. People want one storyline. There is no one storyline. This is not one negotiation. It is several negotiations stacked on top of each other. There is the visible question of de-escalation. There is the hidden question of deterrence. There is the nuclear question. There is the sanctions question. There is the shipping question. There is the militia question. There is the question of who gets to shape post-war politics in places like Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, and beyond. And above all of that sits the biggest question of all: what kind of regional order is coming next? That is the real reason the Switzerland talks could redraw the Middle East, not because borders will suddenly be redrawn with pens on a conference table. More likely, the map that changes is the map of influence, the map of who talks to whom, the map of what is tolerated, the map of trade routes, security guarantees, deterrence lines, and political legitimacy. A region can be redrawn without moving a single border stone. It can be redrawn when enemies create rules, when rivals open channels, when shipping lanes become protected through tacit understandings instead of permanent brinkmanship, when reconstruction money begins to flow according to a new political logic, when governments that once relied mainly on force begin to rely more on bargaining because force has become too expensive. That is what viewers should be watching, not just will there be a deal, but what habits might come out of these talks, because habits matter in geopolitics. If rivals get used to testing each other through messages instead of missiles, that alone changes the future. If they create a habit of crisis management, the region becomes less explosive even if it never becomes peaceful. If they create a habit of economic linkage, then every future escalation carries a larger price tag, and price tags change behavior. Now, before we go further, we need to confront the obvious objection. People have heard this kind of optimism before. The Middle East has no shortage of summits, secret channels, backdoor messages, and dramatic diplomatic headlines. Many of them produced hope for a week and disappointment for years. That skepticism is not cynical. It is intelligent. There are good reasons to doubt any breakthrough. The region is full of actors who gain power from instability. There are hardliners in every capital. There are domestic audiences leaders must satisfy. There are deep ideological wounds that cannot be negotiated away like tariff rates. There is trauma. There is revenge. There are families across the region who do not experience geopolitics as strategy, but as funerals. That is real. And any serious analysis has to start there. But skepticism can become lazy if it assumes that because peace failed before, all future diplomacy is meaningless. History does not repeat in a neat loop. Conditions change, power balances shift, new technologies alter deterrence, economic needs evolve, alliances loosen, generations age, political myths grow weaker or stronger. The same proposal can fail in one decade and matter in the next because the environment around it has changed. And the environment has changed. The United States is no longer approaching the region with the same assumptions it had 20 years ago. Gulf states are not behaving exactly as they did 20 years ago. Iran is not operating in the same strategic environment it faced 20 years ago. Israel's threat picture is different. The role of drones is different. The role of cyber conflict is different. The role of Asian energy demand is different. The willingness of outside powers to shape regional outcomes is different. Even the meaning of leverage has changed. That matters because diplomacy is never just about personalities, it is about incentives. When incentives change, impossible conversations suddenly become possible. Not easy, not guaranteed, but possible. And that is the opening Switzerland provides. So, what might actually be on the table in these talks, whether formally or informally? At the narrowest level, there could be discussions about de escalation rules. What actions trigger retaliation? What actions cross red lines? Can intermediaries create faster channels to stop miscalculation? Can shipping routes be shielded from becoming hostages to every confrontation? Can a strike in one theater be prevented from setting fire to three others? At a broader level, there may be discussions about sequencing. This is one of the oldest tricks in diplomacy. Side A will not do the big thing until Side B does the small thing. Side B wants guarantees before making the first move, so negotiators build a ladder. Step 1, Step 2, Step 3. Freeze this, pause that, verify this, ease that. It is slow, technical, frustrating, and usually invisible to the public. But this is how serious bargains are built. Quick pause. If this breakdown is helping you see the hidden logic behind the headlines, hit subscribe, leave a comment with the word balance, and share this video with someone who follows geopolitics but wants deeper analysis without the usual shouting. Then there is the sanctions question. Sanctions are not an on-off switch. They are a maze. If relief is discussed, the fight will be over timing, verification, and whether any promise can survive long enough to matter. Then comes the nuclear issue, hovering over everything even when it is not named in every sentence. Any U.S. Iran channel, direct or indirect, eventually runs into the nuclear file. Even if the immediate talks are about war avoidance, the deeper strategic question remains the same. Is the future built around permanent escalation, temporary freezes, or some more durable framework? That question changes every calculation in the region, and beyond the nuclear file sits another hidden layer: prestige. Do not underestimate prestige. States do not only negotiate over weapons and sanctions, they negotiate over status, over respect, over recognition, over who gets treated as a central player and who gets treated like a problem to be managed. This matters because a deal that looks rational on paper can still fail if one side feels humiliated by the way it is framed. That is another reason neutral venues matter. Switzerland is not just a place. It is a stage designed to lower humiliation. Now let's zoom out even further. Suppose these talks succeed in the modest sense. Not peace, just a reduction in the chance of sudden regional explosion. Why would that be so historically important? Because the Middle East sits at the intersection of too many global systems. Energy is the obvious one. If the Gulf becomes less volatile, global markets breathe easier. But it is bigger than oil prices. Shipping insurance, freight costs, military deployments, inflation expectations, industrial planning, and food prices all react to regional risk. A calmer Gulf is not just good news for diplomats. It changes calculations in boardrooms and central banks. Trade routes are another layer. Over the last few years, the world has been reminded that choke points are not abstract geography. They are pressure points. When ships reroute, time is lost. When time is lost, costs rise. When costs rise, politics follows. The Middle East connects oceans, continents, and supply chains. Any diplomatic shift that reduces disruption changes more than headlines. It changes the rhythm of commerce. Then there is great power competition. Every regional truce also changes the game for powers outside the region. The United States, China, Russia, European states, India, and others all have reasons to care about whether the Middle East stabilizes, fragments, militarizes further, or moves toward managed competition. Nobody is watching as a neutral spectator. This is where the stakes become truly global. If the region moves from open-ended confrontation toward structured rivalry, then outside powers will adapt. Investment strategies will change. Military posture will change. Diplomatic coalitions will change. The balance between American influence, regional autonomy, and outside mediation could shift. That is why a quiet meeting in Switzerland can matter far beyond the Alps. Still, do not romanticize diplomacy. Some leaders talk to avoid disaster. Others talk to buy time, test weakness, or look reasonable while keeping pressure alive. That is why every hopeful statement must be judged against behavior. In geopolitics, language can be a bridge, but it can also be camouflage. So how do we tell whether these talks are real in the deeper sense? Watch actions after the meeting. Watch whether military signaling becomes more disciplined. Watch whether the language around shipping changes. Watch whether intermediaries stay active. Watch whether sanctions conversations become more technical. Watch whether regional states begin behaving as if disruption is becoming less likely. Watch whether major investment or infrastructure plans suddenly look more confident. Real diplomacy leaves fingerprints long before it leaves monuments. There is another deeper reason these talks matter. They expose something uncomfortable. Many actors in the region may already know that the current system is failing, even if they cannot say that openly. The old model was built on deterrence through recurring crisis. Pressure the other side, punish the other side, build leverage, respond harder, escalate carefully, signal resolve, repeat. But every cycle raises the risk of accident, overreaction, or chain escalation. And every cycle drains money, attention, and political capital. Sooner or later, serious people begin asking a dangerous question. What if the system we built to protect ourselves is now making everyone less safe? That question is the beginning of real change. Not because everyone becomes moral, because everyone becomes exhausted. Exhaustion is underrated in geopolitics. It can push leaders toward mistakes, but it can also push them toward realism. A region can reach a point where too many players, for too many different reasons, quietly decide that the old script costs more than it delivers. If that is what is happening now, then the Switzerland talks are not a side story. They are the first whisper of a new chapter, and that new chapter may not look like peace in the way idealists imagine it. It may look more like a cold peace, a structured rivalry, an armed coexistence, a network of understanding strong enough to prevent catastrophe, but not strong enough to create trust. Do not dismiss that. For a region with this much firepower and this much grievance, even a colder, narrower, imperfect stability would be historically significant. Now let's ask the most provocative question of all. If these talks continue, who wins? The honest answer is that everybody hopes to win differently. Washington wants fewer fires and more bandwidth. Tehran wants survival with dignity and leverage. Gulf capitals want growth without regional shock. Israel wants a future with fewer strategic threats. Mediators want relevance. Outside powers want influence without chaos. Nobody wants the exact same future, but sometimes history moves forward not because everyone agrees on the destination, but because enough players agree that the current road leads off a cliff. That is why diplomacy often advances through overlapping selfishness, not shared idealism. And maybe that is what makes this moment so important. The talks may be driven not by trust, but by converging fear. Fear of miscalculation, fear of economic pain, fear of uncontrolled escalation, fear that one more strike, one more closure, one more spiral could push the region into a war whose consequences nobody can fully contain. Fear is not noble, but it can still change history. Here's my second request, and I want to make it different. If you think quiet diplomacy matters more than loud posturing, send this video to a friend without saying anything except watch until the end. And if you want more deep, clear analysis like this, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Now, let me show you the 3 signals I would watch most closely in the weeks and months after any Switzerland channel stays alive. First, watch whether the talks become technical. Technical talks are boring to the public and exciting to serious analysts. Why? Because slogans do not produce mechanisms. Technical teams do. If you start hearing about timelines, verification steps, maritime coordination, sanctions sequencing, or deconfliction procedures, that is when diplomacy becomes harder to fake. Second, watch the behavior of money. Money is often more honest than rhetoric. If major regional players begin acting as though a less chaotic future is possible, you may see confidence expressed through infrastructure, logistics, trade corridors, port strategy, and cross-border projects. States do not place billion-dollar bets on pure fantasy. Third, watch whether outside powers react with support, discomfort, or subtle sabotage. A diplomatic shift in the Middle East always rearranges somebody's leverage. If the architecture changes, not everyone will be equally happy. Sometimes the strongest clue that talks matter is how nervous they make actors who benefit from the status quo. And that brings us back to the title of this video. Could secret Switzerland talks redraw the Middle East forever? Yes, but probably not in the dramatic, cinematic way people first imagine. The region is unlikely to wake up one morning transformed into harmony. Old enemies will not suddenly forget history. Militias will not dissolve because negotiators drank coffee in the mountains. Ideology will not disappear. Trauma will not disappear. Distrust will not disappear. But the region can still be redrawn in a quieter, more important way. It can be redrawn if leaders begin accepting limits. It can be redrawn if rivals build reliable channels. It can be redrawn if deterrence becomes more predictable. It can be redrawn if shipping stops being used as a message board for every crisis. It can be redrawn if reconstruction, normalization, and security begin to fit into one new strategic pattern. And if that pattern emerges, future historians may look back at these closed-door meetings and say the obvious thing was hidden in plain sight. The most important moment was not when the public heard a breakthrough. It was when key players privately realized the old framework had become too dangerous to keep. That is how eras end, not always with a victory parade, not always with a dramatic surrender. Sometimes an era ends when powerful people, in a quiet place, stop believing their old assumptions. That is why Switzerland matters here. It is not the hero of the story. It is the setting where denial becomes harder to maintain. And once denial breaks, strategy changes. So if you remember only one idea from this entire video, make it this. The real question is not whether there will be a perfect deal. The real question is whether enough actors in the Middle East have finally decided that endless uncertainty now costs more than controlled compromise. If the answer is yes, then the map is already starting to change. Not just the physical map, the map of fear, the map of influence, the map of red lines, the map of who can threaten, who can mediate, who can invest, who can rebuild, and who gets left outside the next order. And once that invisible map changes, the visible region usually follows. So the next time you hear about a quiet meeting in Switzerland, do not ask only whether a document was signed, ask what kind of future powerful people are trying to make possible before the cameras arrive. Ask which rivalries are being frozen, which risks are being priced in, which trade routes are being protected, and which old assumptions are quietly dying. Because history often changes direction before it changes language. And in the Middle East, that early turn may already be happening. Before you go, try this. In one sentence, tell me in the comments what matters more in this region right now. Justice, deterrence, or stability. Then share this video if you think more people need analysis that respects complexity without drowning in jargon. And if you have not subscribed yet, join us because the next phase of this story may be even bigger than the secret talks themselves. In the end, maybe the most powerful thing about these Switzerland meetings is not that they promise peace, it is that they reveal something far more important. The main players may finally understand that the old game can still be played, but it can no longer be controlled. And when the people who built the game start looking for a new set of rules, the whole region stands on the edge of transformation. That edge is where the Middle East may be standing right now. And years from now, if a different regional order does emerge, people may realize that history did not first announce itself through a grand speech in a capital city. It first appeared as a quiet conversation in a neutral country where rivals sat down not because they trusted one another, but because they had begun to fear the future they were creating. That is what makes these talks dangerous. That is what makes them necessary. And that is why they could matter forever.